It was a day like no other in the political world, with tensions running high between the United States and China. President Donald Trump had just announced a massive hike in tariffs, 145% on Chinese imports. The markets were reacting nervously, international leaders were scrambling for answers, and the media was buzzing with opinions. But perhaps no voice was louder than that of Hillary Clinton, the former First Lady, Secretary of State, and presidential candidate. At a gathering of liberal political analysts and news commentators, Hillary took the stage with her signature sharpness and confidence. The crowd hung on to every word she said as she began mocking the president's recent move. "You know, I've seen many strategies in my career," she began, "but this is new. Tariffs like this are not just reckless, they're dangerous. A 145% tariff on China? Let's be honest here, folks, it's a recipe for economic disaster. We'll be paying for it, not China." The audience responded with approving applause and laughter. Hillary's criticism seemed calculated, as if she had been waiting for this moment to pounce on the president's trade war strategy. She painted a grim picture of the American economy, with rising consumer prices, disrupted supply chains, and strained relations with one of America's largest trading partners. She compared the tariff hike to a reckless gamble, suggesting that Trump's brash approach would send shockwaves through the global economy. But Hillary's mockery didn't stop there. She targeted Trump's administration, casting doubt on the White House's ability to manage such a bold and risky strategy. She scoffed at the idea that a simple tariff hike could force China to back down, calling it an illusion. In her eyes, Trump's actions were motivated by personal ego rather than sound policy. "Let's face it," she continued, her tone dripping with sarcasm, "Trump's tariffs are nothing more than a diversion. A way to distract from his failure to address the real issues facing America. He's so focused on winning that he's willing to sacrifice American workers, businesses, and families. And for what? A headline." The crowd laughed again, the media cameras flashing as Hillary's comments went viral. But as Hillary basked in the spotlight, a quiet storm was brewing in the White House. Karoline Leavitt, the young and dynamic White House press secretary, was watching the event unfold from her office. She had grown up in a time when the media and political elites relentlessly attacked conservative values. Hillary Clinton, in particular, had always been a thorn in her side. Karoline wasn't going to sit back and let the former First Lady mock her boss without a response. That night, as Hillary's speech continued to dominate the news cycle, Karoline sat at her desk crafting a response. Her words would cut through the noise. She would not let Hillary's mocking comments go unanswered. She knew this moment was bigger than just another political exchange. It was about defending the president's vision, his economic strategy, and the future of America. The next morning, as Karoline entered the White House briefing room, the press corps was buzzing. Reporters, eager to get a reaction from the White House, had already gathered. Karoline stepped up to the podium, calm and composed. She was ready to make her statement. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice firm. "I'm here today to address the comments made by former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Yesterday, she mocked President Trump's tariffs and called his strategy a disaster. I'm here to tell you that her predictions couldn't be further from the truth." The room went silent. Karoline had their full attention. Hillary Clinton has spent her entire career playing the political game, but what she fails to understand is that America is not interested in playing games anymore. President Trump's tariffs are about standing up to China and ensuring fair trade. For too long, China has exploited our economy, and this administration is determined to put a stop to it. Karoline's voice rose with conviction, making it clear that she was not just defending the president, but championing a new era of American politics, one where the country didn't bow to global powers but stood tall and fought for what was right. "The former Secretary of State may want to lecture us about trade policy," Karoline continued. "But let's not forget that her tenure as Secretary of State did nothing to prevent China from manipulating trade and stealing American intellectual property. Under her watch, China's influence grew and American workers were left behind. President Trump is changing that." The press room was now fully engaged, and Karoline could feel the shift in the room. She was ready for the next phase of her attack. But Hillary wasn't one to back down. The stage was set for a battle of words, a war of narratives. The world would be watching closely to see who would come out on top. Would Karoline's defense of the president's policies be enough to silence Hillary's mocking rhetoric? Or would the former First Lady continue to dominate the narrative, positioning herself as the voice of reason? It was just the beginning of a high-stakes battle that would captivate the nation. As the days passed, Karoline Leavitt's response to Hillary Clinton's mocking comments continued to dominate the media. The tension between the two political figures was palpable and each side dug in their heels. The battle wasn't just about trade tariffs anymore, it had become personal. Karoline, with her fiery defense of President Trump's policies, had garnered the attention of millions, especially after the press briefing. Her words had struck a chord with Trump's base, many of whom were already wary of the political elite and their globalist tendencies. But Hillary Clinton wasn't about to let a young press secretary overshadow her. She had spent decades crafting a reputation as a seasoned stateswoman, and she wasn't going to be upstaged by someone she considered to be a political novice. Within hours of Karoline's remarks, Hillary fired back with a tweet that would stoke the flames even further. Karoline Leavitt may want to learn some history before she blindly defends Trump's tariffs. This isn't a win for America, it's a gamble that will hurt working-class families. No amount of spin can change that, Hillary wrote, her words sharp and biting. The tweet went viral within minutes, triggering a fresh wave of media attention. Commentators and pundits began speculating about a new political rivalry, with Karoline and Hillary being the key players. For Karoline, it wasn't just about defending the tariffs anymore, it was about standing her ground against one of the most prominent figures in American politics. She had to be prepared for what was coming next. Karoline responded swiftly, once again taking to the podium in the White House press room. I've listened to former Secretary Clinton's comments, and once again, they missed the mark, Karoline began, her voice unwavering. Hillary Clinton's criticisms of President Trump's trade policies are rooted in the old ways of thinking, policies that have allowed China to take advantage of the American people for far too long. Let's be clear, the tariffs aren't a gamble, they're a necessary step to level the playing field for American workers. A few reporters leaned forward, eager to hear more. Karoline's confidence was infectious, and her words had a clarity that resonated with the conservative audience. She continued, President Trump is doing what Washington elites like Hillary Clinton have failed to do for years. He's putting America first. He's standing up to China, and he's doing so with strength and determination. And we are already seeing the results. American businesses are now looking to reshore manufacturing, creating jobs here at home. The trade deficit is starting to shrink, and that's a win for the American people. The room buzzed with energy, but Karoline wasn't finished yet. She knew the stakes were high. As Karoline spoke, Hillary's supporters began to fire back on social media and in the press. But it was clear that Karoline had the upper hand in this ideological clash. The White House press secretary wasn't just defending President Trump anymore. She was defending an entire movement, a new vision for America's role in the world. The fight was far from over, but Karoline Leavitt had proven that she was no stranger to political battles. She had faced down the former First Lady and Secretary of State, and with every word, she had taken the fight to Hillary's doorstep. The stage was set for the next round. Who would come out on top in this high-stakes showdown? As the political drama unfolded, the nation found itself in the middle of an epic clash between two powerful figures, Karoline Leavitt, the bold and unyielding White House press secretary, and Hillary Clinton, the former First Lady and Secretary of State who had built her career on political savvy. The media frenzy around their war of words reached new heights, and what began as a simple critique of President Trump's tariffs had morphed into a battle for the future direction of American politics. The White House, meanwhile, was enjoying a boost in approval ratings. Karoline's confident and articulate defense of the president's trade policies had struck a chord with the American people. Her unwavering commitment to President Trump's America First agenda resonated deeply with the conservative base, while many moderates began to appreciate her no-nonsense approach. She had become a symbol of the new political movement that Trump had ignited, one that was unafraid to challenge the status quo and put the interests of the American people first, even at the cost of international diplomacy. But Hillary, ever the strategist, was determined not to be sidelined. Her supporters had rallied around her, echoing her criticism of the president's tariffs as reckless and damaging to American families. The former Secretary of State's camp had begun to amplify her narrative, emphasizing that Trump's trade war would result in higher prices for consumers, layoffs in industries dependent on Chinese imports, and strained international relations. The media was eating it up, and Hillary's message was cutting through the noise once again. It wasn't long before Hillary took her fight to a new stage, the Senate floor. In a scheduled appearance at a Senate hearing, Hillary delivered a blistering critique of Trump's tariffs, framing the issue as a matter of national security and global stability. Her speech was calculated, persuasive, and backed by statistics. She argued that the tariffs were an overreaction to a complex problem, one that required diplomacy, not brute force. She painted a picture of a president out of touch with the complexities of global trade, someone who was more interested in making headlines than solving real problems. Her speech reverberated across the airwaves, and once again, the media was abuzz. The moment was ripe for Hillary to regain control of the narrative. She had the experience, the political connections, and the intellect to sway public opinion in her favor. Her message was clear: Trump's tariffs were a mistake and only a seasoned leader could correct the course. But Karoline wasn't about to let Hillary reclaim the spotlight. In a rare move, Karoline took to Twitter herself, directly addressing Hillary's speech. With a tweet that would go viral, Karoline wrote, "Senator Clinton, while you may think tariffs are reckless, the reality is America has been taken advantage of for far too long. It's time for leadership that puts the interests of the American people ahead of political games. The tariffs are about protecting American jobs, not making deals with foreign powers. We've tried your way for decades and look where it's gotten us." The tweet was both a rebuttal and a challenge that Hillary could not ignore. Karoline's words had a way of cutting to the heart of the matter, and once again, the media shifted its focus back to the White House press secretary. As the days passed, the intensity of the back and forth only increased. Karoline made multiple appearances on conservative talk shows, defending the president's stance on tariffs and offering further details on how these new measures were already beginning to show positive results. She emphasized that American businesses were increasingly looking to reshore their operations, bringing jobs back to the U.S. that had once been lost to overseas manufacturing. She pointed to the booming tech sector, where companies were beginning to invest in American innovation rather than relying on cheap Chinese labor. But Hillary, as expected, wasn't backing down. She continued to emphasize the potential consequences of a trade war gone wrong. "This is not the way to fix what's broken," Hillary said in a televised interview. "The real problem is not China, it's a president who doesn't understand the long-term ramifications of his policies. The tariffs are just a distraction, a way for Trump to avoid dealing with the real issues facing America." It was at this moment that Karoline realized the stakes had shifted from a simple defense of the tariffs to a battle for the future of America's role in the world. She was no longer just responding to Hillary's critique, she was positioning herself as the future of the Republican Party, someone who understood the need for bold action and wasn't afraid to challenge the establishment. In a high-profile interview on Fox News' Hannity, Karoline took things even further. She laid out the case for why the trade war with China wasn't just about economics, it was about national security. "Let's not kid ourselves," she began, her tone unwavering. "For years, China has stolen American intellectual property, manipulated trade, and waged economic warfare on our soil. President Trump is doing what no one else in Washington had the guts to do. He's standing up to China. This isn't about tariffs. This is about ensuring that America is no longer at the mercy of foreign powers who play by their own rules." Her words were bold, and the effect was immediate. The president's approval ratings surged as his base rallied around Karoline's message. Even moderate Republicans, who had once been skeptical of Trump's trade policies, began to soften their stance. The administration's focus on rebuilding American manufacturing, securing intellectual property, and taking a harder line with China resonated deeply with many who had felt left behind by decades of globalist policies. But Hillary Clinton wasn't one to be underestimated. She quickly regrouped, meeting with influential figures within the Democratic Party to strategize. Her response would come in the form of a major policy proposal, a comprehensive trade plan aimed at addressing the issues Trump had raised without resorting to tariffs. "We need a real solution," Hillary announced in a major speech, "one that doesn't alienate our allies or harm working-class Americans. The trade war with China is a dangerous game, and we need to find a way forward that strengthens our economy without sacrificing American jobs or relationships with our allies. It's time for leadership that looks beyond sound bites and political theater." Her proposal was ambitious, but it was clear she had no intention of letting Karoline, or President Trump, control the narrative any longer. The battle had escalated from a simple war of words to a full-blown ideological confrontation. Karoline had taken on Hillary Clinton and emerged as a formidable force in her own right. But the real test lay ahead. Who would win the hearts and minds of the American people? Who would define the future of America's trade policies? The outcome of this high-stakes showdown would not only affect the course of the trade war, but would also shape the direction of American politics for years to come. As the political drama between Karoline Leavitt and Hillary Clinton reached a fever pitch, the stakes had never been higher. What began as a clash over trade tariffs had grown into a symbolic struggle for the future of America's global standing, economic policies, and political leadership. The country was watching closely, and both sides knew that this was more than just a battle for policy. This was a battle for political legacy. The White House, under President Trump's leadership, had fully backed Karoline in the ongoing war of words. Despite the mounting pressure from the left, she had held her ground with poise and confidence, gaining respect from conservatives, moderates, and even a few disillusioned Democrats who were increasingly weary of Hillary's brand of political elitism. In contrast, Hillary, ever the seasoned political figure, was using her deep connections and decades of experience to push her counternarrative of diplomacy over conflict and global cooperation over protectionism. But the showdown was about to reach its final act. Both sides were preparing for a major event, the annual Economic Summit in Washington, D.C., where global leaders would gather to discuss the future of the global economy. It would be here, at the center of international diplomacy, that Karoline and Hillary would face off once again. The spotlight would be on them, and the world would be watching. Karoline knew this was her moment. She had been invited to speak at a roundtable discussion on trade policies alongside a group of international economic leaders, while Hillary had been invited as a keynote speaker at the same event. The clash was inevitable, and Karoline was determined to take it head-on. The day of the summit arrived, and Washington, D.C. was filled with anticipation. The press corps had been buzzing for days, eagerly awaiting the latest chapter in the public rivalry between the two women. It was a media circus with reporters, pundits, and political analysts speculating on what each side would say and how the public would respond. As Karoline entered the round table, her head held high, the room was abuzz. Her presence was commanding, and she immediately took her seat at the table, ready to make her case. Across the room, Hillary Clinton was seated, her face a mask of calm determination, ready to present her vision of international cooperation and diplomacy. The discussion began, and the first topic was trade and tariffs. Karoline began, addressing her political adversary directly. "You've spent your career promoting the idea of global cooperation, but the reality is that hasn't worked for the American people. Under your watch, China was allowed to manipulate trade, steal intellectual property, and undermine our industries. You can talk about diplomacy all you want, but the fact is, American workers were the ones who paid the price." Hillary's eyes narrowed as she prepared her response. "Karoline, I respect your enthusiasm, but you're ignoring the bigger picture. This isn't just about tariffs. The future of the global economy requires cooperation. We can't afford to isolate ourselves. If we alienate our allies and engage in trade wars, it will hurt the very people we're trying to protect. We need a plan that strengthens our alliances, not destroys them." Karoline leaned forward, her eyes locked on Hillary's. "And how exactly have your policies strengthened America? You talk about cooperation, but under your leadership we saw the rise of China at the expense of American workers. Now, President Trump is taking a bold stance to defend our industries, secure our intellectual property, and ensure that America gets the fair deal it deserves." Hillary's expression darkened. "This isn't about China or intellectual property, Karoline. This is about the fact that we are heading toward an economic collapse if we continue down this path. The tariffs are hurting American consumers, driving up costs, and destabilizing industries that rely on global supply chains. You talk about bringing jobs back, but the truth is, the very industries we rely on are being crippled by this administration's policies." The back and forth continued for what seemed like hours. Karoline and Hillary had become the two focal points of the summit, and every word they spoke was dissected by the media and political analysts. But it wasn't just their words that mattered, it was the larger message they were conveying. For Karoline, this wasn't just about defending President Trump's tariffs, it was about making the case for a new America, one that stood firm in its interests and no longer allowed itself to be taken advantage of by foreign powers. She had already made waves by standing up to Hillary in front of the press, but this was her opportunity to cement her place as a leader of the new Republican Party. For Hillary, the summit was an opportunity to remind the world of her political pedigree, to show that she was a pragmatic leader who understood the nuances of international diplomacy. Her calm demeanor and measured responses were meant to demonstrate that, unlike Karoline, she could be trusted to navigate complex issues with wisdom and experience. As the debate wore on, Karoline turned the tables on Hillary with a powerful closing statement. "Hillary, you can talk all you want about diplomacy, but let's not forget the lessons of history. For years, America has played by the rules, and what did we get in return? Trade imbalances, job losses, and countries like China taking advantage of us at every turn. It's time to stop playing nice. It's time for leadership that puts America first. And that's exactly what President Trump is doing. The room fell silent. Karoline's words hung in the air, and for a moment it seemed as though she had gained the upper hand. Hillary, visibly shaken, tried to counter, but the words didn't come as easily this time. Her response, though still articulate, lacked the conviction it had once had. Karoline had outmaneuvered her, not just on the policy level, but on the emotional level as well. The media would report this moment as a turning point in the public rivalry between the two women. Karoline's performance at the summit had solidified her as a rising star in the Republican Party, while Hillary's once unassailable position seemed to waver. The battle over the trade war was far from over, but Karoline had made it clear she wasn't backing down. In the aftermath of the summit, the American people were left to decide where they stood. Would they embrace the bold, unapologetic policies of President Trump and Karoline Leavitt, or would they turn to Hillary Clinton's call for diplomacy and international cooperation? The fight was far from over, but one thing was certain: this confrontation had set the stage for a new era in American politics. In the days following the economic summit, the political landscape in America shifted. Karoline Leavitt had earned widespread praise for her performance, but the final confrontation with Hillary Clinton was far from over. The media buzz around their exchange continued to grow, fueling the fire of an ever-deepening divide between their two camps. The battle over tariffs, trade wars, and America's place in the world had become more than just policy, it had become personal. And with the next presidential election on the horizon, this battle would play a pivotal role in shaping the future of the nation. Karoline's success at the summit had given the White House a new sense of momentum. The president's approval ratings soared as Americans began to understand the broader implications of his trade war with China. Manufacturing jobs were starting to return to the U.S., companies were reshoring operations, and even American farmers were beginning to see a change in the tide as the U.S. began to demand fair trade terms. Karoline's unapologetic defense of the president's policies had struck a chord, especially among working-class voters who felt left behind by previous administrations. She had become the face of the new conservative movement, one that was tough, direct, and unafraid to call out the establishment. But Hillary Clinton was not about to be overshadowed. The former Secretary of State knew that her legacy and possibly her political future were on the line. She had spent years building her brand as a seasoned, diplomatic leader, and the trade war with China threatened to undo much of that reputation. Still, she believed her approach to global cooperation and diplomacy was the answer to America's long-term prosperity. And as much as Karoline had proven herself as a capable advocate for the president's policies, Hillary knew she could not allow her rival to define the narrative. The stage was set for their next public clash, this time at a national political debate where both would face off in front of millions of viewers. The stakes were higher than ever. The debate was expected to be the climax of their ongoing rivalry, one that would not only influence the direction of the country but also determine who would lead the charge in the next presidential election. The debate took place in a packed auditorium in Washington, D.C., and the atmosphere was electric. The air was thick with anticipation as Karoline entered the stage with her signature confidence, while Hillary, ever composed, arrived with a quiet intensity. The moderators introduced the topic, America's future in a changing global economy. Karoline's opening statement was blunt and unapologetic. She looked directly at the audience and said, "For too long, America has been taken advantage of by foreign powers, particularly China. President Trump's tariffs aren't just about raising prices, they're about protecting American jobs, securing our economy, and ensuring that we never again allow ourselves to be exploited by nations that don't play by the rules. I stand by those tariffs, and I stand by the president's vision of an America-first economy." The room erupted into applause. Karoline had struck first with her powerful rhetoric and unapologetic defense of the president's policies. But Hillary was ready for this moment. "I respect Karoline's passion, but the reality is her approach is damaging to the American people," Hillary responded. "The tariffs are not just a political tool, they are a direct attack on our consumers and businesses. The truth is, these tariffs will raise prices for everyday Americans. From the food they eat to the products they buy, they will feel the weight of these policies. And the long-term consequences are even worse. Trade wars hurt everyone, not just China. We need leadership that seeks solutions through diplomacy, not by escalating conflicts." Hillary's response was measured, and her calm demeanor contrasted sharply with Karoline's fiery rhetoric. But Karoline was undeterred. She leaned forward, looking directly at Hillary, her voice unwavering. Hillary, with all due respect, your diplomacy is what got us here in the first place. You can talk all you want about solutions, but when did the last round of negotiations ever work in America's favor? When did we ever get the fair deal? We allowed China to dominate the global stage at the expense of our people. Under President Trump, we're finally fighting back. We're putting Americans first, and we're not afraid to take on anyone, whether it's China, the EU, or anyone else that doesn't play by the rules. The room was divided, with some cheering for Karoline's bold stance and others applauding Hillary's measured, more traditional approach. The debate raged on, but it was clear that both women had staked their claim in the battle for America's future. As the debate continued, the moderators introduced a series of questions related to the impact of tariffs on different sectors of the economy. Karoline responded with facts and figures, pointing out the growth in manufacturing and the return of jobs to American soil. She highlighted stories of American workers who were benefiting from reshoring efforts of companies that were beginning to rethink their reliance on China. Hillary countered with concerns about rising prices for consumers, particularly in industries like electronics and textiles. She pointed to the fact that many American companies were struggling to adjust to the new tariffs and that some had even begun to scale back their operations due to rising costs. We are a global economy, she said. We cannot isolate ourselves. The world is interconnected and our prosperity depends on cooperation, not confrontation. As the final round of questioning arrived, the moderators asked both candidates what they would do to ensure long-term economic stability and global leadership for the United States. Karoline's answer was direct and resolute. We will continue to push back against unfair trade practices, protect our intellectual property, and demand better deals for American workers. We will also invest in new technologies and industries that will ensure America remains a global leader for decades to come. The tariffs are just the beginning. We will do whatever it takes to protect America's future. Hillary, always the strategist, took a different approach. We will continue to work with our allies to create a fairer, more sustainable global economic system. We will engage with China and other nations to find common ground, and we will push for reforms that benefit not just America, but the world. Our leadership should be based on diplomacy, not domination. The long-term future of America depends on our ability to collaborate, not just on our ability to stand alone. As the debate drew to a close, it was clear that both women had delivered powerful performances. The final score, however, would be up to the American people. The battle over tariffs and trade had reached its zenith, and the 2024 election would determine which vision of America would prevail. In the weeks following the debate, the political climate was charged with energy. Karoline's supporters were emboldened, while Hillary's camp was steadfast in its belief that diplomacy was the only path forward. The media continued to analyze every word, every gesture, every moment of the debate, but one thing was certain: the ideological battle between Karoline Leavitt and Hillary Clinton had become the defining conflict of the era. As the 2024 election loomed closer, the question remained: would the American people choose the bold, unapologetic vision of Karoline and President Trump, or the diplomatic, internationalist approach of Hillary Clinton? The future of America's economy and its place in the world was now in the hands of the voters. And so, the stage was set. The final showdown was still to come.